No matter where you live in the world, you heat water through some method. And some countries, like Canada, are even ahead of the US, much to my surprise. But the real kicker is finding out how wrong I could have been in picking out my next water heater. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petrie. My guest today is self-proclaimed energy nerd Larry Weingarten. We all have water heaters in our home, and yet 99.9% of us probably know little to nothing about ours, despite the fact that they can actually explode. Alright, now that's rare, but it has your attention. Over the interview, Larry will teach us all the things we need to know, which could help your health, energy usage, bank account, and so much more. Let's get cool with hot water. Welcome to the show, Larry Weingarten.
Hi, glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit for all the people listening?
Okay, I'm a general contractor, teacher, writer, energy nerd, particularly a hot water nerd. I've liked anything about hot water for 40 some odd years, so just love that topic for no apparent reason.
Does that make you a cold water enemy?
No, cold water has its uses too, but hot waters are more specific. Cold water is, you could use that to water fruit trees, but hot water, more specific uses.
Yeah.
That's more in the house. What do we do to get dishes clean? How do we keep it safe? How do we keep water heaters from blowing up and biofilms and bugs from growing in the pipes and, all these things? How do we make it efficient? How do we waste very little water, not wait long for hot water to show up? Lots of nuances and details around hot water that I like.
Well, and as team hot water here, this is one of those when we started talking about, this is a topic, I'm like, oh, I have, and I still to this day, I'm trying to fix it now that I've met you, but I still call it a hot water heater, which is not the term. The water that comes out of it is hot, but it's not heating hot water. So
you're right. In general, this is true. There are times when maybe it is heating hot water. Maybe you have a solar thermal water heater that's feeding a conventional water heater. Then it's a warm water heater or something. But
yeah.
No, generally just water heater is the simpler way of doing it. It's only when you run across nerds in this field that like to nitpick about the term hot water heater that there's any trouble.
Yeah, I went to Google it because I'm like, well, I need some background information if I'm going to talk about this. Like, I know I own a water heater, but that's about all I know about it, right? I know a capacity and that I own it. And I typed hot water heater into Google, and it's like, did you mean water heater?
Wow.
And I was
Google's
like, oh,
a nerd.
thanks, Google, for shaming me in my Google search.
Well, I think most people don't give their water heater a lot of thought, which actually speaks fairly well for water heaters. If you can install it and let it just sit there for 9 to 12 years before it leaks, that says this is an appliance that works pretty well. That's not the most efficient way of going. We replace roughly 9 million water heaters in the US every year. This turns out to be an over $11 billion waste every year because of this. We could maintain water heaters. I have maintained them to get 50 plus years from a tank. And most people don't think you can do that, but I've done it so many times, I know it's easy.
Well, and let's go back to the start of your journey here. When did you first start working on water heaters?
I noticed they're just water heaters. Good.
Yes, I'm trying to fix it. I promise I'm working on it.
I had a friend, older man, sort of like my second father, who owned an apartment house. And he had tenants that were threatening to move out because their water heaters were making noise. Okay, what does that mean? It means they're gas fired. It means there's sediment in the bottom of the tank. And it means that the heat wasn't flowing up through that sediment very quickly. So it boiled water. And as the bubbles of steam escaped the sediment and hit the cooler water, they collapsed suddenly. And if you put your hand on a tank that's making noise, you'll feel it moving. You'll feel it vibrating. So if you get rid of the sediment, the water can never overheat and boil. The noise is gone. So he said, Larry, can you quiet these heaters down? Uh-oh. No one had ever done that before. So I gave it some thought, and I got a milk crate and a pump and some things, put them all together and made a little water-based vacuum cleaner so I could go in from the top of the tank and vacuum the sediment out of the tank, return the hot, cleaned water to the tank, and just keep moving that, filtering it till all the sediment was picked up. It worked. His water heaters were quiet, the tenants were happy. But there was a lot else to figure out. These things had like a little plug on top called an anode rod. What's this? So I started asking questions. I called all the manufacturers. I researched it. I found home economics books from the 40s and 50s, talked about some of this stuff. Ultimately, I was put in touch with a man from Canada who ran a water heater leasing division for Ontario Hydro. They leased water heaters to their clients so they could have a steady load for their power. And they were interested in maintaining water heaters. No one in the US was. So I learned a lot from him, and then I was out servicing tanks. Pretty soon I was teaching him stuff. So it was this wonderful back and forth. But that's probably the long way of saying that, that was my introduction to hot water.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those that, like, even the thought of my water heater, like, actually boiling water is a terrifying thought to me. Because I'm like, oh, what if it's boiling when it comes out of the pipe?
Yeah, you don't want that.
Yeah.
If that were to happen, that would tell me that the thermostat had failed. And it would say that all water heaters since around 1960 have had these safety devices, temperature and pressure relief valve installed, but nobody checks them. I do. I find that of the ones that I check, about 1 out of 4 doesn't work. Of those, about 1 out of 10 is plug solid, which means 1 out of 40 water heaters has no protection from blowing up. A pound of steam is 1,700 times bigger than a pound of water. There's more force in steam than there is in black powder, gunpowder. So it's a 30-gallon heater when it blows up is the same as 2 sticks of dynamite going off.
Which is a terrifying thought that I had never considered, like, my water heater could just explode like a bomb in my garage.
Right. Well, there wouldn't be any garage left if it did that. Yeah. When it still does happen, it's very rare, but when it does, often the house that it's in is leveled. So we don't want that happening.
Yeah, certainly not. Well, and all the more reason to, like, to learn about these things, because again, until today I was using the wrong name for them. So, like, the amount of things I don't know is going to fill up a book. And you luckily have written a book, plus another one now. Why don't you tell us about those as well?
Okay, well, the first book I wrote in 1992, The Water Heater Workbook. It's on Amazon, but it's the basics of water heaters, how to look at them, how they're made, how to make them safe, how to make them last, how to make them more efficient. All kinds of, just anything you want to know, or maybe things you don't want to know about water heaters. And I'm primarily focused on tank type water heaters because that, when I wrote it, and even still, was far and away the most common type of water heater. There are tankless heaters as well. I have a little grudge, I'm sorry to say, about tankless heaters because they're sold on the basis of endless hot water. But most people run hot water minutes a day. They don't need endless. Also, the tankless heater, people don't tell you their heaters need to be maintained. So yes, they'll save a little energy in because they don't have the standby losses that like gas-fired tank type heaters do. But if you have to pay someone to service the heater every year, which the warranty is voided if you don't, then you've just paid at least as much as you saved. So you're not saving money with a tankless heater, and then they're dramatically more complex than an old-fashioned tank type heater, so they tend to misbehave more,
Yeah.
particularly on weekends.
Yeah, interesting. Because we're talking about, like, we've all had water heaters in our homes, apartments, wherever we are, and we generally don't have an issue with them, right? Like
Right.
some, you have them fixed maybe one every 10 years. I think statistically a little lower than that, but like that's pretty infrequent. And if you're saying like, oh, well, with a tankless one, you've got to pay attention to it with a professional every year. Oh,
Yes.
well, that's very different.
Yeah, and just more statistics. 85% of the US has hard water. Tankless heaters don't like hard water because the heat exchanger scales up. So they need to be descaled more often in hard water areas. If you don't, the warranty's void. So it's just a finicky technology. And it certainly has its place. I'm not saying don't even consider them, but probably the most cost-effective technology we have for hot water is a low-flow shower head.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those that it seems like, the biggest reason people are drawn to tankless water heaters are because of the cost efficiency. And yet, the most likely place to actually see them used regularly would be somewhere very upscale because they don't mind having the maintenance for it constantly.
But a lot of people, aren't told about that necessary upkeep when they buy them. They
Yeah.
only learn about it later, or they don't ever maintain it, and then the thing fails. They go to maintain it, and what? It's a surprise. I've heard plenty of stories about people who went back to tank type heaters because they didn't really understand what they were getting into with the tankless. So anyway, that's my pet peeve. I like equipment to be good for whoever is living there. If you have some not very technically inclined person who doesn't ever pick up a wrench, don't give them a water heater that's going to be a nightmare to maintain and requires diagnostic equipment they don't have. It's
Yeah.
not polite.
Well, and that's the thing. Without talking to someone like you, I had bought a very weird shower head. I'll just say that because it's like the most efficient, but in a weird way, in that it basically aerosolizes your water.
Uh-huh.
So it uses like 20 to 30% of the water of a normal shower head, extremely
Okay.
low. But because it uses so little water, they recommend a tankless water heater because like you'll just get cold water for your entire shower otherwise.
Actually, a tankless, this is backwards.
Okay.
Some physics. There's a given volume of water in the pipe between the tank or between the water heater, whatever it is, and the shower head. If you put a low flow shower head on, say it uses half as much water. Okay, it's going to take twice as long, roughly, to get hot water at the shower head, unless you do something with the piping. Most people don't.
Sure.
Okay. As soon as you turn on water with a tank type heater, hot water's flowing out of the tank. With a tankless heater, you have to add 7 to 15 seconds
Well,
because it goes through this fire up procedure. Does the main burner ignite? Is the exhaust fan running? These other things. It has to wake up and decide it's going to give you hot water. So now you're adding this length of time. And the other thing is there are minimum flow requirements for tankless heaters. If you get too low, I've had a lot of people who say when they shower, they have to turn on the lavatory in the bathroom as well to get adequate flow so that water heater will fire up.
Wow.
So how efficient is this?
Yeah, well, I'm very glad I haven't done that, made that change because I'd have made the wrong decision 100%.
Well, one of the other thing I'm going to say about shower heads is aerosolizing actually what you want is fewer but larger water droplets. And it's a little bit technical, but not bad. It's that the larger droplets have less surface area to give up their heat from on the way from the shower head to you. It's actually known that women who generally are shorter than men require hotter water because in that added foot of distance, the water cools off a lot. So it's only once the shower is full of steam and no more evaporative losses can go on does the water maintain its heat better as it flows out of the shower head. So starting with something that shoots large water droplets at you will work better for everybody. And there are some good, 1.5 gallon per minute shower heads out there that do this. Big water droplets are the key.
Well, it explains a lot about my ex-wife, who is about a foot shorter than me. So I was like, God, you take the hottest showers. She's like, it's not that bad. And I'm like, oh, well, now I get it. Like, we're
Yeah,
just different heights and it's much cooler to her.
yeah, that's simple.
Interesting.
But who would have thought that water would cool off that quickly? But it does.
Yeah. I guess it loses heat very rapidly just to air.
Yes. Yeah. And, so it loses both in the temperature change if the air is cooler and if the air is drier, then these evaporative losses cool the water droplets down quickly too. So there's a lot of physics in showering.
Well, and I guess that kind of explains the hot tub, how you're like everything, under the water is fine temperature wise, but right above it can be very cold.
Oh, yeah.
When you're like in a cold environment, you have your arms out of the hot tub or something, like your upper half's frozen. And you're like, well, yeah, the heat's just flying into the air.
People love being in hot tubs when there's snow outside, but you're probably up to your neck to make it work well. Heck.
So, we're talking, I think most people, like you said, broadly more common to have tank type heaters.
Hmm.
I didn't realize that there was both gas and electric.
And there are a couple of different types of electric now. But yes, gas heaters and electric heaters in the US hold roughly each about 50% market share. About half of all the heaters are gas, about half of them are all electric. The new kid on the block is heat pump water heaters. And a heat pump is basically like a fridge.
Okay.
A fridge just moves heat from inside of the box to outside of the box. A heat pump water heater moves heat from the air around the water heater into the water in using precisely the same technique, the refrigeration cycle. Heat pumps can be roughly 3 times more efficient than standard electric resistance water heaters.
Wow.
They're slower, so you probably need a bigger tank, but the efficiency puts them sort of on a par with gas heating. So a lot of places are trying to electrify now and get rid of any fossil fuel burning. So they're moving over to heat pumps.
One, is that one of those like it benefits to be in a warmer environment? Because if it's, a much colder place where you're always struggling to heat, like it doesn't have the ambient temperature to actually heat your water?
Really good question. And yes, yeah, when you get down to mid 40s or lower Fahrenheit, heat pumps really, their efficiency really falls off. And they have electric resistance elements built in. So if the heat pump can't keep up, then the elements kick in. But, that's like standard electric resistance heating. It's not nearly as efficient. So prefer to do it so that the heat pump can do the bulk of the water heating.
I know I had been told that with the heat pump, the HVAC system on my previous house, is it was like, 20 degrees, everything's frozen. And I'm like, man, my heating bill is sky high and this thing's cranking around the clock. And they're like, well, it's basically doing nothing. They're like, your
Right.
auxiliary power is mostly what's heating your home right now.
Right. And there are for heating, there are cold climate heat pumps, which can work in that very, very cold environment. They haven't figured that out for water heating yet.
Interesting. So that's the next great frontier of water heating.
Cold climate heat pumps, yes.
Interesting. So on the efficiency scale, it would be heat pump, then gas, then electric.
There's one that I didn't mention that I should, which
Okay.
is a lot of people just love to sneeze at or look down their nose at. Solar thermal water heating
Okay.
actually tops all of the others by a long shot.
Interesting.
And most people think, oh, that's antiquated. We don't want to do that anymore. But I've been working on some sort of newer versions of solar thermal that can do 90% of your water heating, and it's just for almost no cost, just the cost of a pump and control to move water. So a very cost effective way of doing things, and also figured out ways of making the solar thermal cost far less than it used to by using coiled up plastic tubing as your solar panel.
Interesting.
Simple, cheap, easy, efficient.
Yeah. Because I would think most people avoid it either one because they don't generally understand solar that well, where they're like, well, it's always cloudy here and it doesn't work. You're like, well, there's always light, so that's how solar works. But you're
Uh,
like, also, when most people think of solar, like I think about the quote to put it on a house, and I'm like, this is incredibly expensive.
oh yeah, they're going to want eight or ten thousand dollars if you get a standard solar thermal. But and the way, just to go on a little sidetrack here, what people do is they put photovoltaic panels or solar electric panels up and use that to run a heat pump. Okay, this is good for cold climates where solar thermal just isn't likely to behave. But that's not, we need to install climate specific systems. Hawaii is going to need something very different than Alaska. But but to answer your question, I'd say solar thermal can be the most efficient, and then we go to heat pumps, and then gas, and then electric resistance as far as cost to operate.
So is it then the opposite as far as like cost to purchase? Is electric the cheapest, then gas, then heat pump, then solar?
Electric and gas tank type heaters are very much the same.
Okay.
Not much difference in cost, but if we throw tankless in there, those cost more. Like you wouldn't even want to go with a whole house electric tankless because you'd need to put a new line in from the power pole. They require enormous power to run.
Wow.
You might need 200 amp breakers just for the water heater, which is more than many homes have.
Yeah.
But gas tankless often requires a new gas line because it requires standard gas tank type water heaters generally have a half-inch line. You need a three-quarter inch line for tankless gas heaters. So that adds a lot to the cost.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I really answered your question too well. I sidetrack myself.
No, I mean it's very good because like the more and more I hear about tankless from you, I'm like, man, what a terrible decision to put these in the house. Like I was so ready to be sold on it, where I'm like, oh man, what an efficiency boost and its size and its whatever. And now I'm like a whole new power line or a bigger gas line, and it's not going to be as efficient. It's not going to be as fast. Like, oh man, I just want to steer as far away from these as I can get now.
I think there are places where they make sense. Like if you have a vacation house or you have a standard tank, but it doesn't get used, like in a church, it gets used once a week. When you turn on the tap, if there's a tank type heater there, you may get some amazingly smelly rotten egg water coming out because anaerobic bacteria action of the anode rod putting hydrogen gas in the tank, all that teams up to make this really stinky water. Tankless heaters don't have any of that, so you won't get smelly water from them. So there's a plus.
Gotcha.
But I try to look at everything on balance, and maybe the simple fix these days, they make tank type water heaters out of plastic. Marathon is a brand that's got a fiberglass tank with a plastic liner inside of that, guaranteed for life. No odor, because there's no need for an anode rod.
I mean,
So,
it's like all these parts where you're like, oh yeah, the anode rod, and I'm like, yes, of course, the anode rod. Like, I have no idea what it is, but I understand that I'm like, this is an element of a tank type heater because it's metal now.
okay. Okay, so what an anode rod is, they're generally made out of magnesium or aluminum. Aluminum is used only because it's cheaper and works less hard than magnesium does. Again, I have a bias. Aluminum, if you look it up, is a neurotoxin. Let's not drink this stuff. In
Yeah.
fact, I don't know that I even want to bathe in it because you can soak things in through your skin. Magnesium, on the other hand, is vital to our health. It's involved in many hundreds of chemical processes in the body. It's good for us. So, okay, let's put the right kind of anode rod in a tank. And what it does, it's like a little battery, a little electrochemical reaction starts to happen. If you mix steel and magnesium together in water, you get about 8/10 of a volt flowing between the two of them. The magnesium corrodes away so that the steel cannot rust. And the steel doesn't rust. You can't measure it. It's so little. So if you really were a nerd, you could hook two water heaters together and create a flashlight. But that's nerd thinking. Sorry.
I love it that you're like, yeah, I power the light in my garage with my two water heaters. Like,
Uh-huh.
what?
But
Uh,
so this sacrificial action event eats up the anode rod. And the more conductive the water, the quicker the rod is used up. Softening water, people think is a good thing, right? We're taking the hardness out of the water, but we're replacing it with sodium, with salt. That makes the water more conductive. An anode rod that should easily last for 5 years, I've seen totally consumed in 6 months in over softened water. So you want to soften the water and leave like 60 to 120 parts per million of magnesium and calcium in the water. Don't soften it down to zero like we're often told to. You know,
and I've been told like I have hard water before, but I'm like,
yeah.
I don't know what this means. Like it's water. How is it hard?
Hard water means it depends on who you talk to, but generally over roughly 200 parts per million of total dissolved solids in the water is considered hard.
Okay.
Some
Gotcha.
people will say it's more, some will say it's less, but maybe it's just, not rock hard, but brittle.
Yeah.
I don't really know. But
It makes me think about my showers entirely differently now, as I'm like, okay, aluminum neurotoxin, rust in the tank if we're having problems, and salt in the water. I don't feel clean anymore.
so, the hardness in the water is not a problem at all.
Okay.
But I would soften it as little as you can get away with. Never drink softened water
Hmm.
because sodium in our diet is so high from all the foods that we eat anyway. So health and hot water mix up quite a lot. I've learned. So if you have to soften just a little, make sure that you have only a magnesium anode in the tank. There is another choice. There's a thing called a powered anode rod. It actually gets its energy from plugging into the wall. There's a little wall wart, a little transformer that can power this thing that sticks into the tank to prevent rust. The official name is an impressed current anode rod. They use them all over the world for different reasons. The technology's been around since the 40s. Anyway, so that way you could protect the tank without adding anything to the water if you wanted.
Well, and yeah, certainly, the less things in my water now, the happier I am.
Uh-huh.
If let's take all this information and say you get to build your dream home, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
What are you installing in it? Like what specifically are you going to put in your house?
Okay. I would probably use, well, let me tell you a little bit about the home that I did build. And I finished it in 2006. That's where I'm speaking to you from. It's off grid. It is one of the most energy efficient homes in the US. Got written up in the New York Times. It met this thing called the 1,000 Home Challenge. It was the 13th home to do that, where these homes use at most 20% of what standard homes do. I use about 10% per square foot of living space. My home uses a tenth as much power as standard homes.
Wow.
But I built out of what's called SIP panels, or structural insulated panel system. Or foam core panels. It's foam with plywood on both sides. I have 8-inch thick foam walls, 10-inch thick floors, and 12-inch thick roof. It's sort of like living in an ice chest. But it means that the heat loss from the house is tiny.
Yeah.
A water heater could heat it. But as far as the hot water system in the house, I do have a propane fired water heater. It's a direct vent water heater, so it pulls air from outside and exhausts right back outside. So it doesn't, there's no way it can pollute the indoor air because it's a very snug house, and I have to be careful what toxins I let get in.
Yeah.
And then right on top of that water heater, I built this manifold, basically a vertical pipe with little tubes running off the side of it. These little tubes, little 3/8-inch tubes, go to every point of use, every hot water use in the house. So I put the water heater in the basement under the kitchen, so it takes 4 seconds to get hot water at the kitchen sink. Worst case is like 30 seconds to an upstairs shower. So that this saves water. I'm on a well, so it saves pumping costs. So I still like this. I was recently involved in building a house for with a high school to compete against universities and colleges from around the world. It was called the Orange County Sustainability Decathlon, and our house actually won. We were just a high school, and we won. Part of that was the water heating system that we used was solar thermal, which I have on my house too. But we use this coiled plastic tube solar thermal system to heat the tank, and then I put a manifold on top of the water heater. I ran 1/4-inch tubing to the various points of use. That's like the size of tubing that feeds an ice maker.
Right.
Tiny,
Yeah.
tiny tubing. It takes like 3 seconds to get hot water in that house. So very little water waste, very little energy waste. To me, that's getting pretty good.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those that I think differs, person to person, it's going to be different because some people are going to, want to spend an hour in their showers
Hmm.
and, just drain their tanks. And they're like, well, that's why I bought an extra large tank.
Well, and that's fine. If they want to use a bulk of hot water, get a bigger tank or get two tanks and hook them up in series.
Mm,
Make sure they're insulated well so there isn't a lot of heat loss from them. If it's a shower, do consider a low flow shower head because that helps you to take that long shower. Another thing, if you really want a long shower, there's a thing called a drain water heat recovery device. You put it in the drain, so the warm water that would run down the drain, the cold water goes through a tube around that and takes the heat out of the drain water
mm.
and puts it back into your shower.
Interesting.
You can capture 60% of the lost heat and put it back into your shower. So basically, a simple way of thinking about it is a 20-gallon water heater would give you the same shower as a 40-gallon water heater if you use this device.
Yeah. So why, when there's things like this, why are they not standard practice anymore? Like, why don't we just do them?
Drain water heat recovery is now code in parts of Canada. We're sort of slow to catch on here. Yeah, they in education, there is no single source, there is no ongoing education for plumbers, for contractors in general. So they do what they've always done because they know it works. Contractors sadly have been the sort of test bed, the lab rats for people that want to build new stuff. They build it, they don't test it adequately, and then they give it to contractors, and then it fails. Whose fault is it? So contractors, with reason, are sort of wary of new stuff. But I'm not. But we still need to, you know,
Yeah.
find out what's good and use it.
Well, and especially, like if we're a step behind, like Canada's already doing it, like they're our study case.
Uh huh.
Like, let's
Yeah.
just stare at them, and then when it works, we just do that.
Yeah. 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 It's pretty simple, and I think I said how much we waste every year just replacing water heaters because no one taught us to maintain them. We can do so much better with energy as well. So a lot of our financial education is on first cost. What does it cost to put in? That's it. That's as far as we go. I like to think in terms of life cycle cost. Over the life of this thing, how is it going to behave? And sometimes things that cost a little more upfront have dramatically lower life cycle costs. I did some math a couple of years ago. If I got one of these Teslas that has free supercharging, okay, Tesla can be a million-mile car because they have far fewer moving parts to wear out than gas-powered ones. Okay, I did the math and I figured over that million miles, you could save in the vicinity a little more than $500,000 by owning a Tesla that you didn't have to pay for fuel because you get all these miles. You don't have to replace the car every 1 or 200,000 miles, less upkeep. And then if you drive the free fuel, I know fuel comes from someplace, somebody's buying it, but from a simple what's in it for me point of view, an electric car where you don't have to buy fuel for it is a no-brainer.
Well, and very interesting. I mean, especially on that, now is going to make me look at Teslas and think like, oh, maybe I should go electric. I was always afraid that there was going to be like a battery problem or like that they don't have often maintenance because you're not doing like all of the services that you do to your standard fuel car.
Hmm.
However, like you've got to replace a $15,000 battery every 3 years or something.
Except it's probably going to be more like every 15 or 20 years with
Oh,
that
good.
battery. And another thing I can say is I've been looking into this. Teslas that are driven in the salt belt states, places where they use road salts, don't last as well as ones that are in other parts of the U.S. So, in the environment the car lives in matters too.
Interesting. Well, and I mean, that applies obviously the same way, to our water heaters and everything like that. So let's just take your home as a study for shelf life here. Say
Okay.
we've done all these things, right? We have the solar integrated heat. We're running propane tank, for any backup we need.
Hmm.
Um, it's well insulated, and we've got one of the recapturing devices in our shower.
Which I do.
Good, really good for you. God, you're on top of it. Um,
Well, I could be my own lab rat. You see, I couldn't do this to anybody else, but I wanted to see.
yeah. So what's the yearly maintenance for you? Like, what do you have to do every year without question?
Sweep the driveway. Uh, Almost nothing.
Okay.
I thought about this and I designed the house so, like I used roofing. I used cement fiber shingles for the siding of the house. I'll never need to paint them. It's done. It's got a 50-year warranty. Um, I use Trex trim for the trim work around the house. Again, I don't have to touch it. Stainless steel screws. For the flashing around the house, I used copper sheet metal. It turned out to cost the same as galvanized sheet metal. I just bought sheets of it and took it over to the sheet metal shop where they bent it to the shapes I asked, and I put it up, and it cost essentially the same as buying pre-bent galvanized, which is going to fail. So I've got something. So basically, I figure I've got if you can control water, you have a long-lived house. And I've done a lot to control water, prevent risk of fire, like the LA fires. I'm out in the sticks. I wanted to design something that could withstand wildfire. So that was on top of my head, and I don't have like attic or crawl space or vents for embers to get in and cause fires. I took the various building materials and took a MAP gas, a high temperature torch, to see what would happen with flame. So, basically, I've probably got a 200-year house.
So realistically, your maintenance is just like make sure there's not sediment in the tank, nothing's breaking, and then that's about it.
Check the anode. For the water heaters, one trick you can do is to add a second anode rod to your water heater. Instead of having just one, add a second one. Okay, now you can go more years between checks. Like to me, if you add a second rod, you can go 5 or 6 years. So every 5 or 6 years, I'll need to check those rods. It's a 30-minute job.
Well, I was gonna say, how hard is that for like your average person to just add a rod?
Not all that hard. I mean, it sort of depends on what the plumbing hookup is. If they're adding it when they put a new tank in, it's absolutely simple. One other thing I like to do is with a brand new tank, before you put it in place, take the anode rod in it out, add some Teflon tape to the threads, put it back in. Now, when you go to take it out in 5 years, it'll be easy.
Because it's not all stuck onto the threading.
Right, right.
Clever.
Just simple tricks. I've with my own hands worked on well over 5,000 heaters. So I figured out some stuff.
You're like, this is a simple thing to do, and it will save me so much time and hassle in the end. And it's just one of those trade job, like learned things.
Hmm.
Like I learned from a janitor once that he's like, I always put garbage bags underneath the garbage bag I put into the garbage. Because
Ah,
that way, when I pull the bag out, I've already got a new bag and I just pull it up and install it. When I run out, I do the exact same thing because there's no wasted time walking back and forth. I'm already there.
anything that can save steps when I'm on a job, you never go back and forth to your truck or your van with nothing in your hands. Always have something. You're cleaning up the job as you work on it. Then when you're done, you drive off. Easy. So don't waste steps.
So, in talking about, things that can go wrong, obviously, like the explosion is a whole outside risk that we're like, all right, let's hope that never happens. What about like the thermostat with that deregulating the temperature, that safeguard missing? Is that something people can adjust or check on their own?
Oh, sure. I mean, basically, the old-fashioned approach is take a cup and let the water run till it's hot, and then fill that cup and measure it. In the old-fashioned concept was use a candy or meat thermometer, something you have in the kitchen, and measure it. Manufacturers set their water heater controls at about 120. And they do this because they got tired of being sued because of scalding hot water. Legionella bacteria, the bacteria that causes Legionnaire's disease, would, dies off at 140. So my approach for a very long time has been, let's set it as close to 130 as we can, because the scald risk isn't too great. People know when the water's a little too hot, you can back out. One of the most dangerous places in the house is the bathroom, because shower temperatures, if people are moving quickly because somebody flushes a toilet or something, or your tankless water heater is not giving you the same water temperature, people move fast and then they fall and get hurt. There are more deaths from that than anywhere else in the house. But I keep going off on side trips here. But if we thermostat, you can measure what they're putting out. It varies somewhat depending on the ambient temperature that the water heater lives at. So if that varies, then the temperature you get from out the tap is going to vary too. But I aim for 130 as a good safe place. If you have really old or really young people, immune compromised people, the proper approach is to actually have hotter water, like 140 in the tank, and put a mixing valve in that then mixes cold water as it leaves the tank to mix it down to 120. And that way there's no bacteria growing in the tank, and you don't get scalding hot water.
Well, and that seems like just a safer idea in general is just to say, like, if we keep this thing at a temperature that will kill bacteria that are harmful to us, and then just have a mixing valve, we would be better off because it would be less dangerous, right?
Should be, might be, but there are always caveats. 85% of the US has hard water. Mixing valves scale up and get stuck and don't work well at times in hard water. So sometimes they get stuck open. So you just get lukewarm water, and people don't like that much. So this has been a sort of a battle that's been going on in the hot water industry for decades now. How do we deal with this? And there is no simple answer. I think if the people living there, like if it's a nursing home, absolutely have a mixing valve and mix the temperature down, and you have someone there who can maintain it as it needs it. In a standard home, I'm not, with normal healthy people, there's not much point. Another thing that is interesting is, for 50 years, we've been using more and more efficient water fixtures, low flow toilets, shower heads, so on. You used to be able to buy 8-gallon per minute shower heads. Now 2.2 or so, much less. But our pipe sizing hasn't changed. It was plenty big enough, and now it's dramatically too big. And what that means is water flow has slowed down in the pipes, so there are biofilms and bacteria growing in the lines now, which, because we don't have fast enough flow to scrub the pipes. So it's another source of bugs.
Yeah, well, and, if you think about that, like how much piping is running through the average house or the average building, and then, the times nobody's using it, it's just sitting there,
Mm-hmm.
just stagnating and, growing if it
Right.
has bacteria or
Uh-huh.
any of those things.
Uh-huh. What a deal.
Ugh, yuck.
I'm not, we don't get sick all that much from it, or at least it hasn't been identified as a major source of illness in the US. But certainly this risk is there, and biofilms grow any place water is in contact with anything else. So, it really, I like this mixing of, say, if we can do it, if we can use quarter-inch tubing, we know we're getting good flow, the pipes are being scrubbed. It's simple to repipe a house in quarter-inch because it's tiny. You can put it in hollow baseboard. You can run it places you can't run standard plumbing. So it would be cheaper, easier, more energy and water efficient, and safer when it comes time to like get rid of the old steel pipes to look at quarter-inch PEX or PERT pipe.
Well, and I'm mentally adding all of these to the list. Where like when we review this episode, I'm going to be making a list of all the things for a dream house. Where I'm like, oh yeah, add that to it too. One of the things I had heard about, and I'm not 100% sure if somebody was just playing a trick on me or not, was using a water heater to heat your flooring.
Sure. If you have a fairly energy efficient house, so the heat loss isn't too great, and this has been done, you can use a separate water heater. Don't use the same one that's hooked up to your domestic tap. Because if you want to grow bugs in a water heater, do it by having radiant flooring or radiant walls or radiant ceiling that doesn't move much of the year. But yes, I've been involved in jobs like that and heard of many others. If the like a perfect place would be bathroom floors. If you want nice warm bathroom floors to step on, radiant tubing in those floors heated by a small water heater is ideal.
Interesting.
Simple.
Well, and that's one of those like my feet are always cold. So I'm like, ooh, heated
Oh,
flooring. What an
oh,
idea.
okay. Actually, I should mention there's a website, heatinghelp.com, started by a friend of mine, Dan Holohan. His daughter runs it now, Erin, and it gets the best heating people from all over the world on that site, and they answer questions for people and help them think through stuff. So if you want to talk about radiant floors or radiant anything, that's the place.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and I only have one more question just because we're on, the heat topic, right?
Uh-huh.
Getting, too hot, too much movement, too little movement, too whatever. Is it possible for them to freeze? I mean, they are a tank of water. Like, can they, if somebody put one outdoors in an extreme environment, could it actually freeze?
It could. It almost never happens with a tank because there's so much thermal mass, but that doesn't mean the pipes can't freeze. So, if you're going to be and this is a problem actually with tankless heaters because they're low mass. They don't have all those gallons. So if those are installed and then things freeze, there's concern. And I've seen them. The brass valves just blow up. It's unpleasant.
Yeah.
But really the risk is pretty small, and in most areas the plumbers, like if you're in Juneau, likelihood is you're not going to be installing a tank where it can freeze.
Right. Yeah, you're like, we're going to go ahead and put this one inside. And
Yeah,
they're like, oh, but that's going to take up indoor square foot. And you're like, yeah, but it's also not going to rupture.
right,
Yeah.
right. And the plumbing going and coming from it is much safer then too.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a wonderful chat. I've enjoyed this immensely. I thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your time. Make sure you can
It's
tell
fun.
people where they can find your books and where they can find more from you as well.
Okay, books. The Water Heater Workbook and the Philosopher's Wrench are both on Amazon. And actually, I'm coming out with a book too, Philosopher's Wrench. as well. And yes, there's a lot of philosophical stuff, but there's quite a bit about just hot water, plumbing, and energy stuff too in that book. For me, I have a website, just larryweingarten.com. Larry, and then WEINGARTEN.com, and there's a contact form there if you want to get in touch, and I'll bother you.
Fantastic. I will put all of the links to that stuff in the show notes, so if anyone is looking for them, just drop down from wherever you are currently. They're right there, they're clickable, no worries about spelling or searching or anything else. Like, I've made it easy for you. Larry, thank you so much for doing this.
This is fun. Thank you.
I don't know about all of you, but this really has me rethinking a huge amount of what I would put into a dream house if I could afford to build one. In other news, April is here and the rankings are all over the place. Number 1, the United States, with Oregon, New York, and Virginia now at the front. Number 2, Canada, with Ontario as king. Number 3, Israel, which is new. Number 4, South Africa, almost certainly thanks to Irma bashing it last week. And number 5, Australia, with Queensland just barely leading Western Australia. That'll all probably level out in the next week, but it's still pretty cool. And that's it for this week. Have a great week, a great weekend, and I'll see you all back here next week for another new episode. Until that next episode, pretty pleased with all those things I keep saying that help the show grow, like rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing. Also, remember that you can reach out to dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social medias if you want to reach me personally. But most importantly, stay dumb.